Another fine day in the city of Pittsburgh, and in a peaceful suburb, an eager fan peruses the shelves of her extensive collection to find a subject for her next Top 10 video. What's this? A choice has been made? Yet another fandom older than she is and about the dynamic duo, no less. A beloved showed review that's long overdue, away to the laptop. Will she be able to gather her thoughts into a decent review? Is this parody going on a bit too long? Will she ever quit this narration and just get on with the video already? Keep your computer screens close, the best is yet to come. Hey everybody, it's ToonGal12, and this is a top 10 that's been long overdue for me. Some of you may remember my top 10 superheroes countdown, and Batman was one of the heroes that made the list. In that video, I talked about how I liked Batman because of his versatility as a character. Whereas many other comic book heroes are mostly confined to one defining personality, Batman has the unique distinction of being interpreted in a variety of different ways. And somehow, all of them are valid. Whether it's dark and brooding, or light and campy, no matter what your taste is or what mood you're in, there's a Batman for everyone. And since I've already dedicated a video counting down my favorite episodes of the film noir-inspired animated series, it was high time I talked about my other favorite depiction of the Caped Crusader, that of course being the 1966 show. For a long time, and maybe even to this day, fans have been pretty divided over their opinions of this show. Many feel it was too silly and nearly ruined the character, but I respectfully disagree, considering the tone of the comics during that era and how it took many of its episode plots directly from the comics coming out at the time, making this show actually pretty faithful to the time period that Batman was in. There's also the fact that the show's producers were consciously making a campy interpretation, satirizing the many fads and issues of the era. Case in point, the writers and producers knew exactly what they were doing when they made this show. Adam West, may he rest in peace, stayed a morally just and upright superhero who, while still motivated by the death of his parents, just wants to make the world a better place. And really, every version of Batman is that at their core. This is just the most wholesome and bright interpretation of that motivation. It's like comparing steak and fast food. Yeah, objectively one's better than the other, but you can't eat steak every day. Some days you're just in the mood for a burger, and the same can be said here. The darker interpretations are amazing, but I can only take dark and tormented for so long before I get tired, and when that's the case, the 66 series is the perfect thing to cheer me up. Growing up, I constantly flip-flop between watching both polarizing interpretations, and I loved both of them equally. It just depended on what I was in the mood for that day. As usual, I'll do my best to try and explain why these 10 episodes are my favorites, though this time around, trying to compile this list proved a bit of a challenge, since this series is a bit of a class unto itself. How do you judge a series that's so wholly unique and unlike anything that's come since? As I thought back on which episodes I liked the most and or stood out to me the most, I came to realize that my criteria boiled down to a few things. Great usage of outdoor on-location shooting, clever jokes, creative traps and cliffhangers, and just overall memorable and or interesting plots. Also remember that this list is just my opinion, and I'd love to hear your feedback of what episodes you like the best. Also, keep in mind that each one of these stories was a two-parter, so I'm counting each of the parts together as one story on one number. With all that said, fire up the atomic battery and to the Batcave, old chums, because it's time to count down my favorite episodes of Batman 66. Number 10. Surf's Up, Joker's Under. Okay, as much as I love this series, there is an elephant in the room we gotta address. Even the most diehard fans tend to admit that the third and final season is where the show really pitched downward in quality. From slashed budgets to poor writing to lackluster sets to bumping the episodes down to just once a week instead of the typical two-parter, needless to say, the last season of the show left something to be desired. And it's a shame because this was the season that also introduced Batgirl into the cast, and for how great her costume costume and setup is, she deserved a bit better than what she was given. Then again, there's times where she tends to take over the episodes, and while she's confident and capable, it's sometimes at the expense of making Batman and Robin look foolish by comparison. Let's just say there's a reason some fans refer to Season 3 as the Batgirl show with Batman and Robin. While I can understand the criticism, growing up I didn't really have this problem, since on many of the cable TV networks that would play the show, they would play the episodes out of order, so intermixed with first and second season stories, occasionally they'd throw in a Batgirl episode. And honestly, I think watching the third season in this fashion made the season more enjoyable, because by having the stories mixed up, it made Batgirl's appearances more special and the third season's dip in quality less noticeable. It's only when you watch the series in the intended order that the quality nosedive shows. But that's just me. Anyway, despite everything I just ranted about, there are a few gems to be had in this final season, and in my opinion, this is the best the third season had to offer. Certainly it's the most memorable, considering Surfing Batman got his own action figure. Even for this show, the plot's pretty simple. The Joker kidnaps a surfing champion and uses a brain drain device to transfer the guy's surfing knowledge and talents into himself, so he can then win a surfing competition. And somehow he thinks that by becoming a surfing legend, he'll be able to take over Gotham. Never mind how the Joker built this brain transference device or how it actually manages to work. And you'd think that if he's smart enough to do that, he'd use it for more devious purposes, but nope, winning surf contests is as high as his ambition goes, and according to the label on the machine, transferring surfing knowledge is the only thing this device can do. Oftentimes this show is described as a live-action cartoon, and for my money, this is about as cartoony as it gets. From the aforementioned plot to Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara disguising themselves as hippies, to hot dog radios, to our heroes being turned into surfboards, to having Batman and Joker competing against each other in a surfing contest that includes wearing swim trunks over their costumes, a return of the Bat shark repellent from the movie, and giving the illusion of surfing via wobbling the camera and playing some stock footage in the background. Movie magic, folks. I promise you all the quality only goes up from here, and I definitely would not recommend starting a newbie fan off with this episode, but for how off the rails insane this plot gets, I can't help but smile every time it gets played. It's pure goofy fun, and to quote the nostalgia critic, it's stupid, but it's enjoyably stupid. Number 9. Death in Slow Motion, The Riddler's False Notion. From what I understand, Frank Gorshin was one of the harder guest stars to get back on the show, as he reportedly would only come back to play the Riddler if he was either paid more and or if he was given a good script. As such, save for one token appearance in Season 3, this would basically be his final two-part appearance as the Riddler, and it's a great note to go out on. In this, the Riddler goes on a crime spree, and all the while he films Batman and Robin as the adventure plays out, because as it turns out, he's making a silent movie starring the dynamic duo. I don't want to give too much away, as the reasons why he's making this film and what his ultimate plan is isn't really revealed until the very end, which includes a bit of a surprise twist as to who the real mastermind is behind the caper. Because of the clever riddles, the plot is full of twists and turns and false leads, with tons of homages and references to classic movies, and Frank Gorshin gets to show off his talents at impersonating people, and for how many costume changes this guy goes through, he actually would have made a great false face. More on that guy later. Riddler is arguably the most deranged and deadly of the show's four main villains, if not all of them, as he's one of the few where his actions have directly gotten people killed, and his maniac energy is at full form here. Best of all, this episode also contains one of my favorite moments from the show. You'll notice as this list goes on that I tended to gravitate more towards the stories that broke the show's formula and or brought someone from the outside into the Batcave. In this case, it's Commissioner Gordon, who has to act as a witness when Batman interrogates Riddler's henchwoman to find out where a kidnapped Robin is being held. Having one of Batman's closest associates and friends in the superhero's lair helping him out is a real treat, and it leads to more than a few funny moments.
Great Scott! At last, the fabulous Batcave.
Unusual, isn't it?
Oh, magnificent. I feel as if I'm awakened in some future age. Such equipment. What fantastic ingenuity you and the boy one have employed in hooking it together.
True. We did muster many long hours of brain power. Take this can of Batwick. When I give you this signal, spray a whiff of it in the prisoner's face.
Certainly.
You will notice, Commissioner, that this bat mask in most ways resembles an ordinary operating room oxygen mask. I will introduce no drugs, no serums into Pauline's bloodstream.
I understand.
Now, Commissioner, give her the Batwick, please.
Oh.
Watch very carefully, Commissioner. I'm going to mingle Pauline's captured breath with a clear liquid in this container. If Pauline's answers were true, then the oxygen content of her breath will turn this liquid red. If, however, she lied, then the increase in her metabolism will increase the oxygen content of her breath and cause an imbalance, which will leave this liquid clear and undisturbed. Do you understand?
Oh, yes, of course.
Number 8. A piece of the action, Batman's satisfaction. To anyone who says Infinity War was the most ambitious crossover event in history, I'll point them to this episode. Nowadays, it's common practice to have multiple TV shows take place in the same universe and cross over with one another, like the Marvel Netflix shows or the CW Arrowverse. But back in the early days of TV, such an event was virtually unheard of, and this two-parter is one of the earliest examples of such a crossover. A new villain named Colonel Gum is in town, and he's brought with him his counterfeit stamp operation, along with the Green Hornet and Kato, who want a piece of his operation. At least that's their cover anyway. See, for the uninitiated, the Green Hornet and Kato are actually superheroes, but they pose as villains to get close to the bad guys and destroy their criminal activities from the inside out. Unfortunately for them, this means that on top of Gum, they also have to deal with Batman, who isn't too happy about having a swarm of new villains descending on Gotham. And when these two dynamic duos clash, only one team will be left standing. This is a really well put together crossover of two shows that are very similar yet very different from each other. It's fun to see Bruce Wayne and Britt Reed exchange friendly rival banter over whose city is better and vie for the affections of Pinky Pinkston, the victim of the week, who's actually given more to do and actively tries to help the heroes, including having a cute dog and sending a coded message in alphabet soup? Okay. A message that Batman then decodes by pouring the soup into the Batcomputer? Huh. Betcha Apple products can't do that. I'll fully admit this two-parter isn't perfect. I would have preferred to have them fight a bigger villain like the Joker or something, but Gum's fun to watch, and he's grown on me over time. It's fun to see Roger C. Carmel, best known as Harry Mudd on Star Trek, switch disguises to play 4 different characters. And it was probably for budget reasons, but it would have been awesome to see the Batmobile face off against the Black Beauty, which sadly doesn't happen. Thankfully, these setbacks are rectified in the Batman 66 comics, which had the two duos team up again. Seriously, go to your comic book store and pick it up. It's awesome. It's a shame the Green Hornet show didn't last as long as Batman. It's probably because the show was treated far more seriously and lacked a colorful returning rogues gallery similar to Batman. And the clash of styles definitely shows here. At certain points, it's almost as if the future, darker, more grim takes on Batman is meeting his sillier, lighthearted earlier counterpart, which is interesting if you want to view it in that context. Either way, when our two teams of heroes inevitably clash, both teams fight to a draw, so fans of both won't be mad. But honestly, if Bruce Lee was allowed to really cut loose, Robin would be one dead bird. Number 7. Pop goes the Joker, flop goes the Joker. Much like Death in Slow Motion, The Riddler's False Notion, this wasn't just the last 2-part story featuring the Joker, but also one of the last episodes to close out the show's 2nd season before they'd switch to the half-hour one-and-done format in the 3rd season. And thankfully, the Clown Prince of Crime's last 2-parter gets to go out with a bang. This time around, the Joker's latest caper is all themed around art, as he appears to want to take the art world by storm. But is he really out to make a name for himself in the artistic community, or is he just interested in the art of the crime? And when an art-loving young woman falls for the Joker's so-called talent, one must ask themselves, is causing mayhem and chaos worth it to produce fantastic art? And can you separate the art from the artist, especially if the artist is a horrible person? Okay, maybe I'm going just a bit deep there, but it's a lesson I can't help but think about when watching this story that, by all intents and purposes, is a parody of the pop art scene happening during the time this episode was made. The sometimes pretentiousness of the art world is made fun of in full force here, with tons of jokes and comments about the nature of art itself, what constitutes good and bad art, and what's more important, the intent behind the artwork or the end results. It's also interesting to see Baby Jane Towser, the victim of the week, go through a bit of a character arc. So many times when we're introduced to the villain of the week, they already have an established mole with them in their gang, and it makes one wonder how these women got mixed up with these maniacs in the first place. Here, though, we get a rare occasion where we get to see an innocent lady start off with good intentions, then gradually see how she's charmed by the Joker into helping him with his caper, to the point where she's willing to excuse some of the horrible things Joker does if it means producing great artwork. And actually, there's quite a bit of unique things going on in this episode. At this point in the series, a formula of how a typical episode played out was firmly established. Here, though, they take nearly everything with the formula and totally mess with it. Save for the art theme, Joker's plan bounces all over the place, from him wanting to become an artist, to opening an art school, to scamming unsuspecting millionaires out of their money, to stealing priceless paintings. And every time one plan gets foiled, he just seemingly comes up with a new idea on the spot, making for plenty of genuine twists and turns until finally Batman pulls the rug out from under him.
What's this I hear about stolen paintings?
Oh, I have dozens of them, and each one an old master.
You don't say.
Yes, I do say. Oh, you can say that over the phone, Batman, but if I had you here, I'd pound you to a pulp.
Start pounding, Joker.
Even better, we get an extended sequence where Bruce Wayne goes undercover at Joker's art school, and when a bat fight breaks out, it's Bruce Wayne who has to fight the Joker, all while not giving away that he's actually Batman. It's not often we get to see the heroes fight in their civilian identities. Even less often is when Alfred gets in on the action. Honestly, this is the real reason this episode made the list, as it contains my favorite moment of the entire series, hands down. When Joker storms Wayne Manor thinking he's about to score some quick cash, little does he know he's about to make a huge mistake. I could go on forever about how Alfred is my favorite character in the Batman mythos period, and this moment cemented it for me.
Where's the safe?
Over there.
My, you poor little thing.
Behind the picture, sir.
There's no safe there.
Alfred, be careful, the Joker's an arch criminal.
I know, madam, but a very important.
Stand back, I say, or I'll... Ah, what's this?
Don't touch that.
A secret passage!
I'm afraid the Joker accidentally tripped the Batpole switch and mistook this for a secret passage, sir.
Then he's down in the Batcave.
He didn't quite make the Batcave, Master Robin.
Then where is he?
I believe he should be arriving presently.
Someone get me off this crazy dumbwaiter! I can't breathe!
Joker says he can't breathe, Alfred. Why don't you give him some breathing space?
With pleasure, sir.
Number 6. The Zodiac Crimes, the Joker's Hard Times, and the Penguin Declines. Well, how about that? 2 Joker episodes in a row. Goes to show how much the writers must have liked his character, as the Joker arguably got the most well-written episodes out of all the main villains. And though there's one more outing of his that I personally like better, this epic 3-parter, objectively speaking, is his finest outing. Yes, folks, we got a 3-part story here. A 3-parter that should have just been cut into another movie to show in theaters, as I actually like it more than the actual movie that came out out in between the first 2 seasons. Even with half the amount of villains, this plot just seems more epic in scope to me in comparison to the movie. Probably because this is a non-stop crime wave versus one caper that's just grander in size. You know you're in for something special when the episode opens with the Joker brazenly breaking into police headquarters and getting right in Commissioner Gordon's face and announcing that he's going on a crime spree all based around the signs of the Zodiac, then escapes in a helicopter. Yeah, this episode ain't messing around. And normally I wouldn't be too crazy about the villain exposing his grand scheme right off the bat, as that can take away some of the mystery, but in this case I can accept it since we got 12 crimes to get through and thus can't waste any time. And really, this 3-parter dishes out all kinds of surprises from beginning to end, including the Joker breaking the Penguin out of prison and the two teaming up. The banter they have together is already worth the price of admission, but even with the Penguin's help, this is still primarily Joker's story, and the stuff he pulls is hilarious and so off the wall I can totally see later incarnations doing something similar. From our heroes and villains interrupting an opera concert with the opera singer trying to keep the show going despite the fight going on behind him, to a fight in a music store with the two sides flinging vinyl records at each other, to the Joker throwing fish at people, to him dressing up like a cop and leading the police on a wild goose chase, to turning Gotham's water supply into jelly. The first 2 episodes also end with the most outrageous death traps in the show's history, one involving dropping a giant meteor on the Cape Crusaders, and the other having Robin getting eaten by a giant clam only Mr. Mushnick would love. Where did the Joker get this giant man-eating clam? Who knows? Who cares? This story is also noteworthy for having an extended car chase using actual guns, and it's all capped off with the villains hiding in the Batmobile's trunk and surprising Batman, leading to a knockdown drag-out fight in the Batcave, a sequence that we should have gotten in the actual movie instead of having Penguin's goons disintegrate with one punch. And on a final note, in regards to Joker's endgame and all this, it seems like he just wants to spread as much havoc and chaos as possible. More than once, he thinks he's killed Batman, but just keeps carrying on with his Zodiac scheme, so offing Batman couldn't have been his only end goal. A lot of it seems like he's just making stuff up as he goes along, and honestly, that's pretty in character for the Joker. As a later incarnation would say, do I really look like a guy with a plan? Simply put, this is one of the most surprising, exciting, and well-written stories of the whole show. I can totally see this story being adapted into the mainstream comics, and with comics not having a TV show budget or time limit, this could be turned into a really tightly written, epic adventure. Oh no! What's this? A power outage? And while we're halfway through the top 10? How conveniently inconvenient! Did this internet blogger manage to save her work? Will the power ever come back on? Will she manage to finish the top 10? Is she actually creating a fake cliffhanger where there doesn't need to be one? Aha! It appears luck favors the prepared, and with just one insertion of the Bat flash drive and a backup battery, our content creator and curator of all things campy continues her crusade. Number 5. Zelda the Great, A Death Worse Than Fate. If you do enough research, you'll find that many episodes of the show, mostly the earlier ones, were directly based off of actual storylines from the comic, and this one is the primary example of that, as it was based off the story Batman's Inescapable Doom Trap. I found this information thanks to the official Bat book, and even better, I have this issue, and upon reading it, save for just a few tweaks here and there, the episode follows the comic pretty closely. Every April Fool's Day, one of Gotham's banks are robbed of exactly $100,000, and for years the police have been stumped as to who the culprit could be. So, of course, Batman is called in to investigate, and as it turns out, the thief is a struggling magician who robs banks in order to pay a criminal mastermind to come up with her elaborate stage acts. But now with Batman Batman on her trail, Zelda and Edval Edgal come up with their greatest magic trick: create an inescapable doom trap to kill Batman, and should the Caped Crusader manage to escape it, they'll then know the secret to pulling off the greatest magic act anyone has ever seen. While the series as a whole is best known for its campy silliness, it's easy to forget that there was a time, mostly in the earlier episodes, where the plots played out more like a serious drama with comedic elements thrown in. And this story is a prime example of that. It's certainly much more quiet and subdued in tone in comparison to the zaniness of other episodes, with our two villains remaining in hiding and not showing themselves to our heroes until the very end of the story. This also includes one of the only times where we don't get a bat fight throughout the entire 2 parts. Some may find this boring, but I found myself just as enthralled and interested as our heroes tried to solve the mystery of who was behind the robberies and how to catch the burglars. There's a lot of straight detective work going on in this episode, an aspect of Batman's character that can sometimes be lost in amongst the craziness of him fighting supervillains all the time. I'll fully admit this story isn't perfect. We don't ever get to see Zelda's magic act, and there's also the matter of her needing a guy to come up with all of her magic acts, and the fact that her falling for Batman is what makes her give herself up. But it never bothered me that much, as I just viewed it through the lens of just a sign of the times it was made in. But all the great points of this episode more than make up for any of the villain's shortcomings. For one thing, this is a rare instance of Batman going up against a new villain he's never faced before. And for another, when Batman plants a fake news story in an effort to try and coax the villains out of hiding, Zelda retaliates by kidnapping Aunt Harriet, thus making the stakes extra personal this time around. This is another rare instance, in fact, I think maybe the only instance in the entire run of the show, where it's not Batman and Robin caught in the cliffhanger death trap. This shows a more humanistic side of Batman, as he's often portrayed in this show as someone who knows everything and can do no wrong, but here he really goofs up and almost gets a loved one of his killed because of his mistake. And actually, that's another rarity for this show that this episode can boast: actual on-screen death. 2 mummy cases are set up on either side of the death trap so that if and when Batman escapes the magic box, the 2 thugs hiding inside the cases will machine gun our heroes to death. But when Zelda has a change of heart and warns the duo, they duck just in the nick of time, and thus the 2 thugs shoot themselves. Oh sure, we never see the bodies, but you know what happened to them, and that's all that really matters. Actually, the Caped Crusaders have a couple lucky breaks throughout this adventure. Really, they only got out of the death trap alive because of luck. If Zelda hadn't warned them, they would have been killed. This might arguably be the closest any villain has come to offing Batman. But it all leads up to one of the sweetest endings of any episode, as it was rare for any of the villains on this show to get any sort of backstory, much less a redemption arc. Zelda is clearly portrayed as someone who fell in with the wrong people and is desperate to have a sensational magic act but sees the error of her ways. And Bruce Evers the Optimist helps give her the tools she needs to reform and make a better life for herself. It's an aspect of his character that I think later incarnations have forgotten about, and it's moments like this that make me love this show in the first place. Number 4. True or False Face, Holy Rat Race. Similar to the previous entry on this list, this show also contained quite a number of original villains made up for the show, and for the longest time I thought that was the case with this episode as well, but here it turns out False Face was featured in the comics before this. Who is False Face? Well, therein lies the burning question. The only thing anyone knows for sure is that he's a quick change artist and master of disguise who can impersonate anyone, and I mean anyone. His ultimate plan is a grand-scale counterfeit money scheme, but what elevates this plot beyond your standard criminal operation is False Face himself, who I can totally see as a bit of a precursor to Clayface. The way he can quickly change outfits and appearances constantly leaves the viewer questioning who's legit and who is actually False Face in disguise. Also impressive is his gang of cohorts, the 3 goons of various sizes being particularly memorable, as well as Blaze, who can pull off some clever disguise work of her own and winds up reforming in the end. And it's both creative and makes sense that a guy who loves disguises has his hideout on a movie set. Because of this, we get to see more of the studio backlot in an episode filled with tons of great stunt work. On that note, if you're a fan of the 60s Batmobile, then this is the episode for you, because this story contains some of the most Batmobile action you'll ever see, with multiple car chases around the city against a guy who also has his own truck filled with gadgets, including changing its color, a missile launcher, and a motorcycle that shoots out the back. But of course, Batman isn't one to be outdone, and so he finally pulls one over on Falseface by tricking him with an inflatable Batmobile? Yeesh, and I thought those people with tons of inflatable characters in their yards were going too far. Also, apparently the Enterprise crew accidentally left something behind while using the Guardian of Forever because Batman has a Starfleet phaser gun? With a plot full of twists and turns, amazing stunt work, and cool gadgets, Falseface is one villain that I wish would have made a second appearance because his entire setup is super creative. And treated just a bit more seriously, he could be a serious contender for one of the most clever villains that Batman has ever faced. Number 3. Instant freeze, rats like cheese. Like I said earlier, many of the very early stories in the show's run were actually played mostly straight with just some comedic elements thrown in, and this episode is probably the best example of that, as this story is actually fairly devoid of the typical jokes and silliness save for just a few moments. I'd even go so far as to say that this is the most somber and serious story of the entire series, and it's fitting considering who they're up against. Mr. Freeze is back in town, and it's clear he has only one thing on his mind: revenge. Revenge on Batman, that is, because as it turns out, Batman is responsible for the conditions he has to live in.
Poor devil. Forced to live in an air-conditioned suit that keeps his body temperature down to 50 degrees below zero. No wonder his mind is warped.
Of course he wants revenge.
I'm not so sure I blame him.
It was an accident, Batman. You didn't mean to knock that beaker of instant freeze on him during the fight in his laboratory.
Nevertheless, I feel it's my duty not only to catch him, but with all the medical know-how at our command, to help that sorry creature back to a normal way of life.
This is one of the rare times that we actually get a proper origin for a villain on this show, and while Bruce Timm's revamp of Freeze's backstory is arguably superior and made Freeze a far more sympathetic character, I'd argue that this version of the origin is more compelling, at least in one aspect. It makes his confrontations with Batman more personal, since in this version it was Batman's fault that he ended up trapped in the cold suit. Like I said, these early episodes didn't mess around. From there, Mr. Freeze leads the dynamic duo on a wild goose chase, stealing diamonds to get funds for the upkeep of his cold suit and temperature-controlled hideout, which is a pretty cool effect, by the way, no pun intended. In doing so, he also intends to humiliate our heroes as much as possible before finally killing them off. This also includes him coming up with a clever idea to have his henchmen dress up like a bunch of Batmans and Mr. Freezes to confuse everyone. You'd think villains would do something like this more often. In any case, it leads to a pretty cool fight scene. Also, in keeping with the trend of picking episodes that break from the norm, we get another rare instance of the bad guys using actual guns and a pretty gruesome on-screen death. Yeah, they may not have shown the body, but come on, you know that guy's dead freezer meat. Oh, and on a related note, this is also one of the few times that our heroes don't get out of the death trap themselves. No special gadgets, no clever thinking, no lucky quirk of fate. Batman and Robin are basically screwed before the police force unfrees them. Yeah, the police actually do something helpful for once. Mr. Freeze would go on to be played by 3 different actors throughout the show's run, and this may be part of why the character didn't make as huge an impact as some of the other villains, since his character's depiction was constantly changing. And it's a shame because George Sanders does a really good job here, and he's my favorite of the 3 actors. Had he come back to play Freeze again, I'm sure he would have won the award for most, well, cold-hearted villain. Number 2. The Joker trumps an ace, Batman sets the pace. Holy 6 cents, Batman! Talk about an episode that left me genuinely surprised the first time I watched it. For as grandiose as the Zodiac Crimes is, sometimes it's the simplest stories that wind up being the most entertaining, at least to me, and this is by far my favorite Joker story. It all starts with the Clown Prince of Crime going on the weirdest crime spree ever, from stealing a hairpin to a hole at a golf course. But of course, nothing is ever as it appears when it comes to the Joker, and soon enough, our heroes figure out that the Joker plans to kidnap the Maharaja of Nimpa, a foreign dignitary who's visiting Gotham. And he does manage to kidnap him, and for the rest of the story, the dynamic duo must find a way to get the Maharaja back safely and defeat the Joker. But is the plan really that simple? Is the Joker just looking for ransom money, or does he have another trick up his sleeve? And is the Maharaja really in danger, or is there something much more devious going on? This is a great episode that takes some of the best aspects that I liked in Zelda the Great and True or False Face and combines them together. We get a ton of outdoor scenes and a nice extended car chase that pits the Batmobile against Joker's tricked out van that has the ability to turn invisible. There's actually quite a few bits of good stunt work in this, especially a sequence where the duo zip lines down from a roof. We also get a simple but clever death trap in which our heroes have to escape a room that's filling with poisonous gas. And they do so by, well, let's just say the writers for The Emperor's New Groove must have saw this episode and took notes. And on that note, that's another high point for this story, the writing. Whoever wrote this episode was clearly on the ball, because Batman does a great amount of detective work this time around, from piecing together clues to utilizing his brain and using his wits to get out of the death trap instead of just relying on some outlandish gadget, to utilizing their alter egos as Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson to poke around a magic and joke shop to see where the Joker's hiding the Maharaja. But best of all, this tight script includes more than a few subtle hints to a rare instance of a twist ending. The first time I saw this, I genuinely did not see this ending coming, but if you go back and rewatch the episode, all the hints are there, and if you can be surprised by this, you know you got a quality story.
Is 80%. Oh! Let's go! Oh, no, you don't. What are you doing?
It's the Joker.
That it is.
But where's the Maharaja?
There isn't any.
There never was.
And my number one favorite episode of Batman 66 is The Bookworm Turns While Gotham City Burns. Funny how my number one pick would feature a villain that wasn't even from the comics and was created wholesale for the show, but lo and behold, in a precursor to the way Harley Quinn would be created for TV, then become so popular that the comics would adapt her, here's a character that's far and away one of the most creative and interesting villains the show ever created, to the point that I wish he was inducted into mainstream canon. The episode kicks off with a literal bang as Commissioner Gordon is straight up assassinated while commemorating a new bridge. For 60s TV, this was some pretty gruesome stuff, and especially for a mostly light and campy show like this, what a shocking way to open a story. Thankfully, it was all just a ruse and Gordon is alive and fine. Turns out the Bookworm, a failed struggling novelist who turned to crime and steals the plots from other books to come up with his schemes, is back in town, though his grand plan remains a mystery. And if the dynamic duo are to save the day, they'll have to put all their literary knowledge to the test and try to dive into the mind of this maniac writer to figure out what it is that he's truly after. For me, this episode is the most fun to watch over and over again. It's got a little bit of everything. A shocking opening, a large part of the story taking place at night, which doesn't happen too often. The Batmobile being treated less like a gadget and more like its own character, including having a bomb detector, the Bat Beam, and an ejector seat.
Ejector seat? You're joking.
Chief O'Hara even gets a shining moment when he gets to ride in the Batmobile and help Batman come up with a clever way to save Robin from the cliffhanger death trap. We also get the first instances of an outsider being brought into the Batcave, as well as a villain breaking into Bruce Wayne's house and stealing the Batmobile. What's also a rarity is a villain Moll who isn't remorseful for what she's done and doesn't reform or fall for Batman at all. But what really sells this episode for me is the villain. As Batman muses over what the bookworm could be planning, this is probably the most deep diving we ever go into a villain's psyche and why he does what he does. Roddy McDowall plays Bookworm wonderfully as a guy who can match wits with Batman on intellectual terms and who seems calm and collected but can snap into violent mood swings anytime things don't go his way. Seriously, he's legit scary when he gets angry, and it's not a childish tantrum either, but a psychotic breakdown that seems more at home in a modern episode of the animated series or Gotham.
Shut up! Oh, don't you dare say that to me.
Bookworm,
No, you're taunting me, aren't you?
No, Bookworm.
Yes, you are. You're taunting, mocking me. And why? Why? Because I have no originality. That's why. Why? Because I'm only the master of stolen plots. There!
But that's also what makes him stand out. Well, that and his cool suit made out of old book bindings, his own unique theme music, and his own set of gadgets that include a tricked-out bookmobile, a headlamp in his hat, a radio built into his glasses, and being able to speed read at a level and speed that could almost be considered a superpower. With an interesting plot, great moments, and a truly unique and memorable villain that deserve more than one adventure on the show, it's no secret why this is easily my pick for my favorite episode. I'm ToonGal12 and I hope you enjoyed the countdown. If you like this video and want to see more, be sure to subscribe and I'll see you all next time. Same ToonGal time, same ToonGal channel.